Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. I've known Herbert Bloch for so many years, and he's been involved in the political life in the Jewish community. He's currently the executive director of the American Zionist Movement, the AZM. But he had a 43-year relationship with former Mayor David Dinkins. He was a special assistant when David Dinkins was the Manhattan Borough president, and he was assistant to the mayor when David Dinkins was mayor of New York. He also was the Jewish liaison. I would say he probably was the top-ranking Orthodox Jew in the administration that wore a yarmulke on the job. So good to have you back. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Zev.
So you go back with David Dinkins a long time, as I mentioned, a 43-year relationship. How did it all come about?
So I went to interview the candidate for Manhattan Borough President when I was 12 years old in the summer of 1977, and I was writing about a young person's view of politics for both the Ramaz school newspaper and for an independent paper in Manhattan then called Jewish People. And I had a column called Politikids, and I would go interview public officials. And I went to a candidates forum, and the candidates gave me a few minutes, candidates running for borough president. But David Dinkins said to me, why don't we, instead of standing here in the hallway, let's go over to that cafeteria across the hall, and I'll buy you a soda, and we'll sit down and chat. And showed interest and spent a half hour with me, showed interest in a young person who cared about politics and said, here's my phone number, here's my card, call me, stay in touch. And I did. He lost that race for borough president in 1977, but went on to then become, and he was then city clerk, ran again for borough president in 1981. I worked on his campaign. He lost again, then worked on his campaign the third time while I was in college in 1985, and he won the election as borough president, and then I went to work for him in the Manhattan Borough President's office for 4 years, and then 4 years with him at City Hall when he was elected mayor. So we've stayed in close touch since. It's been to our wedding, brisses, bar mitzvahs, family simchas, shivas, funerals. He's been a close friend and mentor, to me, like a second father, or someone I've known and cared about for a very long time, and is very close to our family.
And you were with him pretty much almost to the end.
We spoke last spoke a few weeks ago, right after his wife Joyce passed, and after 6 decades of being together here on Earth, now they're together in the next world.
So how would you describe him? You mentioned you had this long relationship with him. He was like a second father to you. So tell us more about that, and you wore a yarmulke, your Judaism was proud, and you went to a lot of Jewish events, that bar mitzvahs and shivas and other simchas and other occasions that you had. So how did he relate to you on a Jewish level as well?
So he was that was never an issue, and it was part of our relationship. I helped him with many of his relationships with the Jewish community. Above all, and the word for him I would use is a mensch. He was a gentleman. He was civil. He believed in public service as a noble calling, and was a dedicated public servant, kind of the old school that probably could be used by more public officials today. He had a relationship with the Jewish community that went back even before my involvement. I know one of his, he sat with Bob Abrams, and they became friends in the assembly in Albany in the mid 1960s. In 1975, 2 weeks after the infamous UN Zionism is Racism resolution, he was part of a group of that formed something called BASIC, Black Americans in Support of Israel Committee, that took out a full-page ad in the New York Times in support of Israel and rebutting the notion that Zionism was racism. And he was someone who had been involved in Soviet Jewry movement for many years, had adopted a refusnik case, had traveled with Z.C. Schnurren, the conference on Soviet Jewry, to protest to Helsinki to protest Reagan's visit with Gorbachev. He had spoken out against Farrakhan's anti-Semitism when Farrakhan had a rally at Madison Square Garden, and Farrakhan made death threats against David Dinkins when he was the city clerk. So he had gone to Israel with the JCRC with Malcolm Hoenlein in 1983 or 84, and then I worked with him on two trips that we went as mayor in 1991. One during the Scud missile crisis when the missiles were falling, and a solidarity 24-hour mission to Israel on behalf of the city of New York. And then again in the summer of 93 to dedicate Kikar, New York Place with the late Mayor Teddy Kollek. So he had a long-time relationship with the community that I was proud to help work with him on. And he was just, for anyone who's met him over the years, he continued, even after leaving City Hall 27 years ago, he continued to go to events, to show up at programs of the consulates, at the JCRC, at events of many, many Jewish organizations. If he was invited, he'd go. He was a people person. He loved being with people, taking pictures with kids. Last couple of years, he went to the mayor's Jewish Heritage reception and sat there kind of holding court in the corner at Gracie Mansion and greeting people. And there was no reason he needed to do that after leaving office, except he loved the city, loved the people, and would continue to go to many, many Jewish community events until nearly the end. So it's sad that his era has concluded.
No, I'm sad. You mentioned that you stood against Louis Farrakhan, and I remember BASIC, which was a very important group that showed black support for Israel. Did he have the same thing about Jesse Jackson? Because I remember questioning him about Jesse Jackson, and I asked him all question about what about Jesse Jackson, who had made Hymietown remarks, and he was upset at me a couple occasions, even bringing it up. So was that more of a sore point with him than, let's say, than Louis Farrakhan?
So he did support Jesse Jackson in his campaigns. He did have discussions with Jackson about the city, the Jewish community, Israel. So he did support the overall Jackson agenda when he was running for president. But Farrakhan's comments were such a egregious level of overt anti-Semitism that at the time he felt he had to publicly speak out, and there was very few, if any, other leaders in the black community at the time who publicly denounced Farrakhan for that.
Now, you were the Jewish liaison, which certainly is always a tough job, but I think was made tougher because the Crown Heights riots took place during that time. And can you describe the relation between the mayor and the Jewish community during that time period because of the Crown Heights situation?
So the mayor had actually a good relation with the community in Crown Heights. On a personal level, he had been to see the Rebbe on 4 occasions. Notably in '89, he had a long visit, and press and people said, the Rebbe spent longer with him than with Koch or Giuliani. On one visit, someone when he was walking out, gave him a keychain with the Rebbe, and he was a city borough president and had his own apartment. He put his keys on the keychain, carried around that and the dollar from the Rebbe, and had a warm relationship with many in the community. The Crown Heights situation was obviously very, very troubling and painful one in the summer of '91. The best way to summarize a long story would be, that the mayor initially had trust in his cops and leaders and in law enforcement that they would handle the situation, and it clearly went on too long. and there was a lot of obviously failure there. He was pained when people would accuse him of any deliberate action or of a pogrom, which implied a state-sanctioned action against the community. So clearly, there were things that the city should have done better in managing that riot in those days of violence. But he overall he felt and hoped that his years of connection with the community would show his goodwill towards the community, and I think that was something that even after the rest of his mayoralty and after that, his connection with the community remained, and that wasn't the Crown Heights situation wasn't the only thing that defined him.
No, it wasn't. But to some that say that in a very close race with Rudy Giuliani, the Crown Heights situation tipped the scale in favor of Rudy Giuliani. Was he upset that the Crown Heights situation may have changed the mayoral race where Rudy Giuliani won and he lost because of it?
In a very narrow race, there's a lot of factors. I don't think that he never considered that was the issue. The percentage of support he got from the Jewish community was almost the same in '89 as it was in 1993. And in that election, there was a referendum on secession in Staten Island. There have been obviously other things that went on in the 4 years of his mayoralty. So when a race is that close, anybody could say, well, this one thing was the difference. But but he never considered that was the reason or held the community in any blame in that sense for his loss.
And as you pointed out, he went to Jewish events and still participated. I remember seeing him at the mayor's Jewish Heritage Day in June, seeing him on a couple occasions, as recently as maybe a couple of years ago, if I remember.
A year ago, last year even, nothing happened this year, and I think he was, but in 2019, and I think this year was hard on him because he was such a people person that he couldn't be out and about since the end of February, until a year or two ago. He was teaching a class every semester at Columbia, the School of International Public Affairs. I would go almost every semester and talk about the Jewish community and other things to his class on urban affairs. And he loved being with the students on campus. He cared about kids wherever he was. There were take pictures and talk to kids, and he'd be late for the next thing if it meant talking to a child somewhere. So he really loved being out and about.
I enjoyed having him. He did a biweekly commentary on the radio with me until Crown Heights, and then after he stopped, which I was saddened that he stopped. I thought it was important to keep the dialogue going. Unfortunately, when New York Magazine asked him about it, he says, there's Brenner looking for publicity. I didn't hold it against him, but I guess he felt he didn't want to get engaged in conversation during that very sensitive period of time.
That honestly, I don't remember, but you obviously do. So, but he's still, he's still engaged with the community for many years, after he was mayor until the end, and it was a privilege for me to be able to help him with that relationship over many decades.
We have a moment or so left. Is there a favorite David Dinkins story that you'd like to share with our audience?
I would think, I guess I gave the story in the newspaper interview this week. About a year or so ago, he called me up. He said, I went to someone's funeral, and I think it was at Campbell's on the east side, and it was a Jewish person, and so I figured I should wear a yarmulke when I go in, and I took I had the yarmulke on top of my pile from your son's bar mitzvah, and I walked in, and lo and behold, I was the only one there with the yarmulke. He said, not even the family, not even the rabbi, and he got a kind of a chuckle out of that. But that was a sort of a symbol of the kind of respectful person that he was going to something that was a Jewish religious event, and he would he would wear a yarmulke, and and that was there's a metaphor of the kind of decent human being he was.
If I remember correctly, he had a knitted yarmulke, right? A crocheted yarmulke that he wore, a very nice one.
He had a crocheted yarmulke that he wore. He used to say that that's the kippah sruga sat better on his afro than the others. And then he had a large collection of others, including from all my family simchas and others that he went to, that he would keep. He had the yarmulke drawer in his apartment with a large collection of them that he would wear on different occasions and match with his different outfits. So like many of us do.
So Herbert Black, I want to thank you for sharing some insights. He was a second father to, referring to David Dinkins. Herbert Black had a 43-year relationship with Mayor David Dinkins, first as a special assistant when he was borough president for 8 years, and then when he was mayor of New York, he was also the Jewish liaison. He's currently the executive director of the AZM. Herbert Black, thank you for sharing your recollections of your relationship with David Dinkins, the former mayor of New York.
Thank you for the opportunity, and may he rest in peace.
And thank you, and we're going to be right back.
Talkline Radio and TV with Zeb Brenner is just phenomenal. Everybody concerned about the Jewish community should listen and watch. He has the best guests. He asks the most interesting questions. He's always so well prepared. It's talk radio and television from a Jewish point of view at its very best.
To advertise on the Talkline network and Talkline's email and social media blasts reaching over 70,000 people, please call 212-769-1925, extension 100. That's 212-769-1925, extension 100. Or email info@talklinenetwork.com.
Thank you for listening to Talkline Communications Network, America's leading Jewish radio and TV network since 1981. This concludes Jewish programming for tonight. For continuous, non-stop Jewish broadcasting, please go right now online to talklinecommunications.com. For more information on all of Talkline's Jewish radio and TV shows, please call 212-769-1925 or email info@talklinecommunications.com.
Talkline's new 24-hour-a-day listen line is 712-770-0534. That's 712-770-0534. Listen online or in our listen line 24 hours a day. Enjoy. Thank you for listening.